Rona Duwe is a graphic and web designer, author, and blogger. Since 2016, she has fought for women's rights, especially on social media, where she's a constant target of trans activists as she appears with her real name. She works on domestic violence, the history of patriarchy, mothers, surrogacy, and self-ID legislation. Since 2021, she has taken part in German rallies for women's rights and against self-ID legislation. Since 2022, she's been a founding member of Lasst, Frauen, Sprechen, Let Women Speak. In 2023 and 2024, she was sued several times and persecuted by police for her activism, but she always fights these attacks successfully. A brochure she published with Stephanie Border, summarized translation of a book by Maria Keffler, To Get Your Child Out of the Transgender Cult, was censored as being harmful to minors. Border and Duwe are fighting the censorship in court, and she'll be speaking to us about the upcoming international feminist protest on November the 1st about German self-ID law.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I will start a presentation now. I want to talk about the history of legal fiction of sex change in Germany, about the coming German self-ID legislation, Selbstbestimmungsgesetz, and our campaign against it. To talk about the prehistory, the Germans and their strange ideas. Germany has a long history of transgender experiments and transgender legislation. Some of the most important persons of transgender history come from Germany. Magnus Hirschfeld, for example, was one of the founders of sexology, coined the term transvestite in 1910, and his institute performed some of the earliest surgical gender transitions, including on Dora Richter and Lily Elbe. His friend was endocrinologist Harry Benjamin. He also came from Germany and went to New York in 1914. He provided the first detailed clinical discussion of the condition, then referred to as transsexualism, and was one of the first medical professionals to advocate for treatment with hormones and surgery. 1966, he wrote the book The Transsexual Phenomenon. His name was used for the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association. This association later became WPATH. Then we have sexologist Volkmar Sigusch on the large image. He was the inventor of the terms cis and trans and was invested in the German transsexuals law. After Sweden, which had a transsexual law since 1971, Germany became one of the first countries in Europe to enable the legal fiction of sex change. In the 1960s, a grown-up man who had crushed one of his testicles and afterwards had his genitals surgically removed came to believe he was a woman from birth on. He fought 14 years at court up to the German Constitutional Court in 1978. Then they finally allowed him to falsify his sex entry in the birth register and register a female name on the grounds of human dignity and the fundamental right to free development of the personality. He later worked as a nurse in a hospital. This court decision laid the foundation for the German Transsexuals Act that came into law on 1st January 1981. Volkmar Sigusch helped with arguments, and the draft of the law was discussed controversially. The Conservative Party, CDU, foresaw the problems of a legal fiction of sex change. The liberal FDP praised it as the most progressive law in Europe and wanted to extend this legislation to the EU. So history repeats itself. Germany has already been an international pioneer in inventing legislation based on a legal fiction of sex change. The self-ID law in Germany is in fact the logical consequence of the Transsexuals Act that already introduced self-defined sex entry in 1981. On the great picture, you see Marie Sabine Augstein on the right, a son of well-known publisher Rudolf Augstein, the founder and publisher of well-known German trans news magazine Der Spiegel. He has been one of the most influential trans activists in Germany. He is a lawyer and fought to constantly weaken the transsexuals law via legal proceedings at the German Constitutional Court. Since 2011, the Transsexuals Act was already a very liberal law. For example, you didn't have to undergo physical changes to get a new sex entry. You just had to do 2 separate expert opinions and a court decision. That was it. On the left side, you see that last year the OECD did their first report about LGBTI inclusion, and it was about Germany. So guess why? We think that to set German government under pressure to introduce self-ID. As Germany wields both European and international influence, it is to be expected that other countries may feel compelled to follow the German example of applying self-ID legislation or worsen their existing self-ID laws. Following the Transsexuals Act, Germany has already the following problems. Female prisoners are already locked up with male criminals and sex offenders for years, and we already have problems with these males for years. Female victims of male violence are already confronted with males in women's shelters. Men already claim access to women's gyms, locker rooms, and women's sports teams. Men already occupy women's quota positions. Here you see Markus Ganserer on the bottom left. He went into Bundestag without doing a change of sex entry. He just said he is a woman, and then he went to Bundestag via a women's seat of the Greens. Lesbians already lose their female-only spaces and get harassed and threatened by males who don't accept same-sex attraction. Freedom of press is already restricted. To refer to a man as a man is penalized. And minors are already exposed to body-damaging interventions through puberty blockers, opposite-sex hormones, and experimental surgeries and amputation on breasts and genitals also for years. Doctors and psychotherapists already risk being punished for conversion therapy since 2020 when they don't affirm a gender identity claimed by a child or adolescent. So what does the new self-ID law in Germany introduce? On the following slides, I show stills of our campaign video. The law abolishes sex in law and replaces it with gender identity. Any man can declare himself to be a woman and change his first name by making a simple declaration at the registry office without any checks. In the event of war, men may not declare themselves to be women and will be drafted as men. So the legislator knows exactly who a man is in the event of war. Since there is no longer any verification before a change of civil status, offenders can use this law to change their identity at will. The change of gender entry does not have to be permanent, but may be changed once a year. I say gender entry because it's no sex entry any longer, it's only a gender identity change. It is possible to choose from 4 different entries: male, female, diverse, no entry. We already had 3 sex entries in Germany, also diverse, but diverse was only for people with an intersex condition, and they had to prove it. And now everyone can say, I'm diverse. And we think that especially people will use it to say they are non-binary. So the fantasy gender identity non-binary is thus declared a legal status in the Self-Determination Act. Parents can determine the gender entry of their children themselves from babyhood. From the age of 5, children should declare to the registrar that they agree to the change of gender entry. They are thus declared capable of giving consent from the age of 5. The minor must declare that they have received counseling, but they don't have to prove it. In the case of minors, the gender entry may be changed at any time. Arbitrary changes to the gender entry of babies and young children by their parents or guardians will make it easier to conceal the identity of these children. This can be used as cover for child abuse or trafficking. Parents could maybe use the loophole of changing the gender entry of their children at will to carry out female genital mutilation on baby girls for religious reasons. This is because the circumcision of boys is permitted in Germany for religious reasons. Babies and small children are no longer protected from the fictional worldviews of their parents and guardians. From the age of 14, adolescents may decide on their own gender entry. However, parental consent is required. If the parents don't agree, a family court can be called to override the parent's veto. For separated parents, there is a risk that the parent who refuses to change the gender entry will lose custody. The draft does not contain any regulations on sex reassignment surgery, but lays the foundations. It gives even small children the idea that they can change their sex and paves the way for physically invasive measures. We already have education materials in German kindergartens already, not only in schools, about gender identity ideology. And we have a queer program in Germany which will force this indoctrination everywhere. And we also have this indoctrination in German children's program, TV program. And by defining non-binary as a gender identity, this target group will presumably be prepared for elective surgery and hormone administration, as health insurance companies have so far not paid for mastectomies for women who declare themselves to be non-binary. Then we will have a prohibition on disclosure, which prohibits the naming of a person's sex and former name, and will now also apply to family members, also to children and to the wives of these men, for example. They say the intent is important. If offensive or unfriendly violations of the ban on disclosure can result in a fine of up to 10,000 euro. But you know that they all say, okay, your intent must have been unfriendly and offensive. I don't think that this will protect women who are wives of these men, for example. I don't think so. Since women are liable to prosecution if they name the sex of a man who has changed his gender entry, they can no longer defend themselves against the presence of a man in previously sex-specific spaces. No woman knows whether a man has changed his gender entry. A man can therefore simply walk into these spaces and claim this. After all, he no longer has to make any changes to his external appearance. This creates a chilling effect for girls and women. Previously safe spaces become spaces of fear. Quotas for women are cancelled. Gender identity, not sex, is decisive for women's quotas now. There are no rules for sex-based statistics, for example, violence and crime statistics. It is therefore to be expected that these statistics will no longer be meaningful in the future and above all will conceal the predominantly male perpetrators. So then we have a permission to provide single-sex spaces in this law they will be granted or rejected on a case-by-case basis via domestic and owner's law. An owner of a sauna can, for example, say, I don't want to have men in my sauna. But we don't think that this will be a real protection because the men who want to enter these rooms can sue these owners of the saunas via General Equal Treatment Act. Women's prisons also have been de facto abolished in Germany, since a women's prison can only refuse a man who identifies as a woman on grounds of discrimination in individual cases. A man can be transferred to a women's prison at his request. He also can get experimental hormone treatments and plastic surgeries if he wants to, financed by the general public in prison. And at the end of his sentence, the man can change his gender entry back to man. This is already happening in Germany for years. In women's sport too, the decision as to whether a man may participate in women's team is deferred to the club, to the single sport club. If the club refuses, the man could sue his way onto the team via the General Equal Treatment Act. The prohibition of disclosure creates an additional hurdle in these conflicts, as a man may not be addressed as a man. The law is set to come into force on 1st November 2024. A change of sex entry can already be requested since 1st of August 2024. Already 15,000 people have applied for this, including more than 500 only in the city of Leipzig. 26 of the Leipzig people are minors. In the draft of this law, they expected only 4,000 registrations per year. Politicians always use the argument, other countries already have self-ID, there are no problems, we have to follow. If Germany falls, this has consequences for the whole of Europe, we think. So it's really important to show the German government what a crap they introduced. The development of transgender surgeries in Europe, in Germany, is also a threat to other countries in Europe. In 2019, Germany dominated the European market and was valued at US dollar 15.5 million. The improvement in healthcare facilities and the presence of doctors, surgeons, and clinics specializing in gender reassignment surgeries will further boost the market growth over the forecast period. In 2021 alone, we had 917 genital surgeries on minors and young adults from 15 to 25. Gender clinics and doctors strengthen their campaigns on social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok and cooperate with youth influencers. The coming German treatment guideline for gender-distressed minors still relies on the SOC 8 of WPATH and doesn't take current studies since 2021 into account. For example, the CARS review is not taken into account. The guideline states that minors can give informed consent and that parents who refuse their consent should be convinced or be reported to Child and Youth Protection. The new large gender clinics in Germany already give themselves English names and claim to become Europe's centers for transgender surgery. So we fear that families from countries will travel to Germany to circumvent the ban on puberty blockers and gender reassignment surgery in their home countries. To rise up against the harms of self-ID legislation, we will do a protest at the German Bundestag in Berlin on November 1st, because at this day the law will come into force in Germany. And we called already for our sisters around the world to join our protests in front of German embassies and consulates of their country. We will start at 12:05, which means it's already too late to stop this legislation. We had a wave of wonderful solidarity following to our campaign video. The video is already translated in 16 languages, even Chinese. We have a lot of international participation. Our sisters will be demonstrating in front of German embassies and consulate in 16 countries by now, or write letters to the local German ambassador. The protest in London is expected to be particularly large and will have appearances of well-known radical feminists like Sheila Jeffreys. We are really proud about it, and thank you so much for your solidarity. In Berlin, we will focus on science, democracy, women and children, and have some high-class female scientists, publicists, and female feminists speaking. For example, Helen Joyce will come, the bestseller author of Trans. We will use slogans of the book 1984 of George Orwell, because what is coming in Germany with the self-ID law has analogies to Orwell's dystopia. The Berlin protest is organized from the group Lasst, Frauen, Sprechen and L Squad Berlin, Frauen sprechen. But we are no outlet of Let Women Speak from Kelly J. Keane. It was a coincidence that we chose the same name. So I think it's important to stress this, not because we want to distance ourselves from Kelly J. Keane, but it's an own group, own German group. We are still asking feminists and countries all over the world to join. As feminists, we have to protect reality, and we have to encourage other women to speak the truth and trust your eyes and ears. We will use the hashtag self-ID harms and women rise, and hope these hashtags will be trending on social media and show a wave of protests around the world on November 1st. Please get in contact via our email address or our social media channels. On our campaign website, we have a lot of material for further inform yourself about the law, and a draft for a letter to the German ambassador of your country, and also an FAQ if you would like to do a protest in your country. There will also be an international X Twitter space about the protest on October 12th, 10 p.m. German time. I think it's 6 a.m. Canberra time. But the spaces of L Squad always last very long, so you can also come a bit later. We try to draw a lot of women in now in this space. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was horrifying and informative, and shocking how similar it is to various states in Australia. I know women will have questions for you. Thank you.